I had my last screen test in New York the day before I started rehearsal in Australia for Like Minds. And so I took these sleeping pills. I had to go straight off the plane to go and rehearse with Toni Collette. And I had a cup of coffee, 2 cups of coffee, in order that I could be present in the rehearsal. In the second day of rehearsal, I arrived, and halfway through the day, she was like, Eddie, it's really nice to meet you properly, because yesterday you were insane. You were literally a crazy person. Les Miserables. I didn't come from particularly theatrical families, but as a kid, my mum and dad would take my brothers and I to Les Mis sporadically. So when I heard that was coming along, I was quite keen on the idea. I was doing a film at the time, a film called Hick, in which I was playing a Texan meth addict paedophile with a limp, and down in North Carolina. And I remember hearing that they were doing it, so in my trailer, dressed as a Texan meth addict paedophile, I sort of recorded myself singing a song from it. But it's this very odd thing, because it was directed by Tom Hooper, who I'd worked with and lied to once on another. When I was doing my Elizabethan period, I did another part in an Elizabethan thing. And so I'd worked with him before, and I knew him quite well, and he was a pal. And I was interested in this part, but I didn't want to go to him directly, but also you don't want him to have the humiliation of telling you that you sing tone deaf and there's no chance of you doing it. So I sort of sent this audition dressed as a Texan meth addict paedophile into the ether, and unfortunately it came back. Yeah, and so it was an interesting experience.
Phantom shadows on the floor, empty chairs at empty tables, where my friends will meet no more.
You have this earpiece in your ear, and there's a pianist playing into your ear, but what they record is totally live. So if you're on set, it's kind of ridiculous, because all you hear is these people singing random without any accompaniment. But what's also quite tricky is they were always going to replace that tinkly little piano you can barely hear in your ear with like a huge orchestra at moments. But at that moment, his character's singing about the death of his pals, and it felt that the way into that shouldn't be, I'm about to sing a song. It should be more like him just thinking the thought process. God, it was pretty intense. Tom Hooper is amazing, but the guy is like, he likes to create situations that are real. So, for example, in that film, we build barricades, and rather than like my shots of us building the barricade, he basically had 5 cameramen dressed up as peasants and had a shed ton of furniture, and to all of us actors playing students was just like, go build a barricade, which was really fun. And I was like, yeah, gritty, real, until a fucking piano was basically falling on my head. I was like, what the fuck? You know, and in fact, I've still got a scar here from this one moment where we're singing this song, Do You Hear the People Sing? And this revolution, I suppose, starts in this moment, and we jump off this hearse, and I jump on horses, and he had like, and then Eddie, you ride the horse through there, and you fire this gun, and you do all that, but it was all done for real. And I was going, this feels a bit dangerous. I'll be fine. Anyway, what happens when you film these things, you get such pumped adrenaline. I had to shoot this flint gun halfway through it, and there's chaos everywhere. Horses, got to the end scene, there's blood like pouring all over my hand, and I basically, like, the flint had sliced into my hand. And suddenly they were like, medic, we need a medic to Eddie, there's blood all over this. At which point Tom was like, oh no, what's happened? And I was like, now you come crying, when there's literal blood on our hand. But he kept it real. Elizabeth, the Golden Age. You know, if you're a British actor, you're going to have your period drama moment. Like, the reason sort of British film does well, basically, is we just got like a massive history of stories and of kings and queens and royalty. So if in doubt, we just sort of dig into that. No, I got to work with Cate Blanchett on the Golden Age, and I basically had very little to do except at one point run into Ely Cathedral and scream whore really loudly at Cate Blanchett.
I'm in the van!
But I'll never forget watching her on that set, and this was the sequel to Elizabeth, and she was so formidable in that film. And I remember seeing her on set, and she was sitting there with just her earphones in, and she was just going, tea, round, royal, literally working on her dialect, and it was just as a kind of work ethic thing. I was like, wait, no, haven't you flipping won the Oscar for that? Like, you've got this down, Kate, you're fine. But watching those people that you admire, you sort of see them in the films, you see them on the red carpet, and you forget that in the midst of that is like staggering, wonderful hard work, and the greats like Kate never stop. You know? The Good Shepherd. It was the most amazing experience. I was playing Matt Damon and Angelina Jolie's son. I was basically cast because I had massive lips, but it was the most intense experience for me because I had done one film but I had barely any experience on camera, and you were flown to New York and you were put up in amazing hotels and you'd go to work every day in these big blacked out cars, and we were shooting in Brooklyn and there would be paparazzi everywhere, and then there would suddenly be a camera here and there'd be Angelina and Matt and Robert De Niro behind the thing and they'd be like, action! And all I basically just saw worry just like carved across my face. And so when I watched that film back, which was an amazing experience, but I just see total fear scored across my visage.
I would like very much to join CIA.
Well, there are a lot of things you can do, Edward. I'd like you to think about this very carefully.
I have thought about it carefully. It's what I want to do. I want to join the agency.
Robert De Niro has this wonderful technique. He would do this thing when quite a few of my scenes were pretty emotional in that film, and he would allow you to play the scene, and then he'd tell you to go back in and to channel the emotion from the end of the scene back into the beginning of the scene, and you do it over and over again. And acting is one of those things that you take all these processes that you learn over the years and you sort of create your own process, and that was one of my first sort of major lessons. But I did my audition, met De Niro for the first time, and he was quite quiet, and he just looked at me and he said, just I was like, what, sorry? He goes, can you just part your hair? Just like, I was like, what? And he basically wanted me to comb my hair. I was like, oh, okay, I don't actually have a, he's like, no, go away and you come back and you can, I was like, oh, okay, so I sent down into Oxford Street in London, went to Boots, a local pharmacy, got a comb, came back like a few hours later, my hair already combed. It was in London, it was years before it got made, and at the time Leonardo DiCaprio was playing the role. I was sitting waiting as other actors went in, and someone passed through the door frame, and I said to the casting assistant, who's in there? And they were like, well, Bob, obviously, and Leo. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you're auditioning with Leonardo DiCaprio. And about 2 minutes later, I was there doing this intense scene with Leonardo DiCaprio, playing his son, like breaking down on him. He was like sort of hugging me. I had this time-out moment in which I was suddenly looking down on the whole thing going, that's Robert De Niro and that's Leonardo DiCaprio, and I have no idea what's going on. So it was quite an intense audition process. That was amazing. I was just like sort of nuzzling into Leonardo DiCaprio's armpit. Jupiter Ascending. I remember watching Cloud Atlas with Kate Mara and I think Rooney Mara in the cinema, and it just being like the most extraordinary bonkers thing I'd ever seen, as was Jupiter Ascending, which was, I feel like we have this spread in England for toast which is called Marmite, and like the ad slogan is you like either like it or you hate it, and I've always thought of myself as a bit of a Marmite actor. People seem to like either enjoy what I do or loathe what I do, and those people that loathe what I do, Jupiter Ascending tends to be their favourite of performances. So I won a prize for it for the worst performance of the year, so yeah, it was pretty bad performance on the counts. In Jupiter Ascending, my character had his like larynx ripped out by this wolfman, and so I made this slightly bold choice of, which I thought was right, of talking like this for the whole film, which I felt sort of suited the costumes and the extremity of the world, but in retrospect, it may have been too much.
I believe Titus is aware of the recurrence.
My spies whisper, but cannot substantiate.
So you have her print, but you don't have her.
But I love the Wachowskis because I've never felt so free on set. Lana would just scream like notes from she's like, do it like an accountant, she would say. But my interpretation of that was to like shout really loudly, which is always very odd because I have a really quiet, like kind, quite gentle accountant, rather than a sort of hardcore imperialist autocrat. Yeah. Savage Grace. Savage Grace is a film that not many people have seen, but weirdly was one of the films I'm most passionate about. Again, another part that I think I was pretty much cast because I had freckles. So I've been very grateful for massive lips, freckles, and some of our greatest actresses having big lips and freckles. And yeah, I remember the last audition for that with Julie walking in and her going, God, you actually look like my son. And I was like, that's amazing. Best thing I've ever heard. But yeah, that was an intense experience. Basically, very, very few people have seen this film, but the year when I did Theory of Everything and when Julianne Moore won the Oscar, we were both, we sort of had this discussion backstage, both of us like so sort of blown away that we had just had the most amazing evening of our lives, but maybe people will go back and watch Savage Grace now.
You're talking about a collar that belonged to Giotto. a dog I loved, and a dog that died.
Inside voice.
Now the dog is gone, but we still have the collar, and we have moved and moved and moved, and we have never lost it.
I think genuinely of all the films I've ever made, I had the most joyous experience. It was set in like Cadaqués, London, New York, Paris. All of it was shot in Barcelona in the extraordinary heat and made for very little money. Spanish crew, sort of wine at lunchtime, and I remember it being a really wonderful time. Spanish actors as well, Elena Anaya and Unaxagalde, the Danish Girl. While we were doing Les Miserables, Tom had said, I've got this script and I'd love you to read it, but then it wasn't possible because it wasn't possible to get it financed. That film had been around for a long, long time. Nicole Kidman had been attached to it, but getting it financed was tricky. So it didn't happen. And then, fortunately, Theory of Everything came out, and it meant that because we were all commodities actors, your value had suddenly shot up a little bit as a consequence of the success of Theory. And so we got to make that film. And that was an extraordinary thing because the people that I met prepping for that part, people from the trans community, the amount I learned, sort of mistakes I made, all of it has been a very formative thing, an amazing thing. But it was an intense film to make.
You've always sketched me better than I was. But what you draw, I become. You made me beautiful. And now you're making me strong.
Just before our film came out, Caitlyn Jenner had been on the front of Vanity Fair, Vern Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, and it felt perhaps that it was time for trans people to be telling their stories, and there was a certain amount of backlash which I felt from that, which I understood and sort of agreed with, but what was interesting is I sort of committed to it quite a long time beforehand. But yeah, so it's a complicated experience because I learnt a lot and I met extraordinary people, and I still haven't necessarily reconciled whether it was the right thing to do. The Theory of Everything. It was made by Working Title, who I adore, and I have to thank, they're a British production house, and I have to thank them for basically a career, but they made Les Miserables, and there was a point when we were promoting Les Miserables where I got a call from agent being like, they want you to go to Japan for the DVD release. And I was like, I was working at time, I was like, I don't know if I've got time really, and my agent was like, no, but it's Working Title, and there's someone that you should go, in order to keep these guys happy. They're some of the biggest employers in this country. So anyway, I went to Japan, which was amazing, and sort of released the DVD. And I came back, and my agent was like, there's this amazing script about Stephen Hawking. I was like, wow, it's being made by Working Title. I was like, amazing, love it. Can I have a meeting? They were like, no, they don't want to meet you on it. I'm like, wait a fucking second, I literally just flew to Japan in order to stay in with Working Title. Like, surely I can get a meeting. I think we just used guilt to strong-arm a meeting, and fortunately 6 or 7 other actors who I really admire had fortunately turned down the part. And I met with James Marsh, who was a wonderful documentary maker, and he didn't make me audition. We talked about it, and he sort of gave me this part. And when you have that experience, you have sort of complete euphoria followed by utter horror, fear of because I didn't audition for it, how does he have faith in me because I have no idea whether I can do this? At least if you've auditioned, they've seen some sense of it. So basically what then happened on that film was I was just so terrified that you just have to, if you're playing a real guy who would see the film and is renowned for not mincing his words, and his whole family would see the film, there was basically no question but to just work your balls off, which is what I tried to do.
Wouldn't that be nice, Professor? A one simple, elegant equation to explain everything.
Winning the Oscar was extraordinary, but I have this thing, I don't know if other people have it, when you're so fueled with adrenaline and you just can't remember anything. The next thing I remember is you get taken straight into this press conference, and there are all these journalists from around the world, but you are literally totally caught in the headlights. You don't know, basically human bodies can't contend with that much thrill and anxiety, or mine couldn't. There was this last question from an Australian journalist that was like, so Eddie, I hear that these 2 actors from Australia were your massive inspirations and influences, and they're 2 brilliant actors from the Australian television soap called Neighbours, which I grew up watching and loved. Having just been on stage, in front of all these extraordinary people, the adrenaline pumping and fueling. Being asked about Neighbours was so surreal that I sort of think I went and sort of passed out afterwards. But the greatest thing that came from that was lovely Jackie, who is extraordinary and plays Susan Kennedy. She heard about it, and then I was offered a part in Neighbours, like just a cameo, which I've yet to take up on. I don't know actually if the invitation is still out there, but I would fucking love. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I read the first few books because my brother had loved them and was completely enticed by them. So I kind of loved them, and then I used to go and watch the films every year because it felt like escapism. And yet you also, like, all the characters would kind of touch you. So I was a fan, but the way in which this film came about was kind of the most secretive. So my dad and my family all work in like proper jobs, and my dad has a briefcase, and so I had decided that a briefcase would be my set bag, the thing that I took to set with all my work to try and feel like I was doing a proper job. And I had this call that David Yates, this director, wanted to talk to me about an unknown project, and we kind of went to this club in Soho, and it was next to a fire, and it was like something out of Potter, and I arrived with my briefcase, and he started telling me this story that J.K. Rowling was writing, and about this character, and about these creatures, and then about this case, and I gently found myself sort of shoving this thing at the back of my case from on the table, because I didn't want him to think that somehow I'd come dressed as the character, which quite a lot of actors do, and I don't think is necessarily the wisest thing. Anyway, I eventually got cast in it, and it's been the most, it's been like a shed load of fun. Fantastic Beasts, The Crimes of Grindelwald. They invited me back. The great news is, on the back of her Fantastic Beasts book that Newt wrote, it was like, yeah, he lives happily married in Dorset. You never know with Jo, she could take it anywhere, but at least he survives, you know, for a while. And coming back for number 2 was amazing because I got to work with Johnny Depp and Jude Law, and those are guys that I grew up kind of loving their work. So they have like amazing puppeteers who come and they sort of show you what the creatures do and how they move, and then you kind of look at the directing, it's like, I'd rather now those guys leave, and you imagine it. So particularly with Pickett, who's this little bow-chuckle figure who kind of, I've been on the tube in London, and I just imagine talking to him, and I do that quite a lot with accents as well. Like, I'll sort of record them on my phone and listen to them, and then occasionally now I realise that people are taking photos of me or recording me while I'm like chatting to Pickett with my imaginary friend, and it's all kinds of sad and weird and deranged.